The following game is a classic known for motifs such as domination on the open file, outpost, weak square complex, and good knight versus bad bishop. Overall, plenty of elements seen in a game that probably should be known by every chess enthusiast. It is London 1922, Alekhine with white, Yates leading black pieces, and he was not a bad player at all. In fact, he is a 6-time winner of the British Chess Championship and overall one of the best in the 20s of the last century, of course. However, in this one, as you'll see, he performed just enough to be remembered for his epic positional mistakes and a classy conversion by his opponent, who soon became world chess champion. Okay, we had d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop g5, castles, e3. Usual Queen's Gambit setup, Orthodox variation, in which black typically struggles to eliminate white's space advantage and gets their light square bishop active. White's interests are completely opposite. Their goal is to keep black passive and restricted as long as possible. Knight bd7, rook c1. The point of rook c1 is kind of a waiting game. Eventually, black wants to take on c4 and push either e5 or c5, attacking white's center and basically equalizing. The move rook c1 is valuable because either way the c file is about to become half opened, and if d takes c4 happens now, light square bishop recaptures on c4 without losing a tempo. So black decided to play c6 and white continues with queen c2. And the waiting game is still on. White is using time to develop their queen while thinking that black is out of their useful moves, but it's not really like that. And we had rook e8. And now white can continue playing something before developing the bishop, but overall black is the one who has king castled, and they are not anxious when it comes to placing the king to safety anymore. Typically, white develops the bishop after getting their queen and the queen's rook into the game. So we had bishop d3 and pawn takes c4, bishop takes c4, and then knight d5. Overall, not a bad idea. They want to exchange dark square bishops and a pair of knights, but also to get closer to pushing e6, e5, completely freeing up the remaining forces. After all, black is lacking space and trading is a good idea. We had knight e4, and the idea here is to replace the bishop with a knight on g5, thus hitting the h7 pawn and threatening mate. That would force black to weaken their kingside, which may be of some significance. Black's best was to play the simple h6 and force white to exchange on e7, in which case that knight on e4 seems a bit too optimistic. Instead, black went for a surprising move f5. And this is the first critical moment. Black makes a move that every beginner level player would probably play. And I hope this is not going to offend some of you. There is nothing simpler and easier than attacking a piece and hoping that they are going to just blunder it. At the same time, not being aware that by attacking, we are weakening ourselves. In this case, and I'm not kidding, I believe that Alekhine was starting to think that this guy has taken something or somehow forgotten to play chess. When you think of the dark squares in black's camp after this move, you'd say that they need the dark square bishop to protect them. But that's exactly the bishop that's gonna be traded. So no logic, no sense in the last move of black. Only tendency to hurt their own position. Let me underline that this is an example of how not to think and play, and to be careful not to do in own games. That part is equally important, if not more important, than learning what to actually do. White takes on e7, queen takes c7, and we had knight from e to d2. b5. Another surprising present for white. Another pawn that is going to be working for the opponent, because it is standing on a light square, and if black is not noticing, they still have their light square bishop waiting to be developed. Now that's going to be even more difficult. And again, what black just did is a typical beginner level mistake, or to be more precise, beginner level instinct. Let me first attack something and then I'll start thinking what to do next. Actually, this game is a perfect example to see where that kind of thinking is going to get you. And not to forget, that move is also weakening black's c-pawn, which immediately becomes backwards. Overall, Yates managed to do two bad things to himself in one move. Bishop took on d5. Well, this is a big decision. As always, when trading pieces or moving pawns in the center, this is a critical moment as well. White is allowing black to get rid of their backward c6 pawn, but on the other side there is an assurance that the c6 pawn is never going to reach c5 square, and thus potentially free up black's light square bishop. When black recaptures, whichever way they want, their light square bishop is going to stay passive for good. In case of e takes d5, pawn on f5 is preventing the bishop from being active on its c8 h3 diagonal. And you see how f5 move affects, even now, the black situation. We had c takes d5. I'm just now noticing that in case of e takes d5, the c6 pawn is not only backwards, but falling instantly. Okay, c takes d5 is required, and then white just castled. Then a5. I've noticed that when a bad player sees an opportunity to push a pawn, they just push. And there is nothing that much different here, although black is a professional chess player and one of the best in his time. Now let's make a pause here and assess the situation. You can also pause the video and try to find a plan for white. Okay, let's see. White has no weaknesses, while black has many. Other than the light square bishop, there are squares and an open file that white is already occupying. Among weak squares, there is the one on e5 and the other one on c5. Both of these are controlled by the black's knight on d7. Now, if we'd trade one of our knights for that one, there would be no piece of black to control those outposts, and weak squares would be just completely ours to occupy. Speaking concretely, playing knight b3, aiming to get to the c5 square and initiate this trade of the only good piece of black, well, may do the task. Alright, let's play knight b3. If there is only one useful piece in the opponent's camp, try to trade it and leave your opponent without any useful or active pieces. Going on, we had a4, that does nothing basically, knight c5 as planned, black took, white took, black took. Trading queens is also in Alekhine's favor because it is going to leave black with no potential at all to oppose white's forces. Okay, rook took on c5, and then we had b4, does nothing again, rook fc1 and bishop a6. Okay, you may easily be tricked that the bishop on a6 is doing something. In fact, it is just hitting an empty diagonal, completely insignificant for the future actions of any side. Therefore, white is not concerned about it and continues to improve on pieces. At knight e5, rook e to b8 and f3. Why would we play f3 if there are already so many active white pieces? Couldn't we just finish them off immediately using only our rooks and maybe our knight? The answer is maybe. If you have a winning position and the opponent can't do anything until we conduct an action, it is normally better to get all pieces involved and active before we start with the final battle. When we compare white and black pieces here, only kings are equal. And we can change it easily by centralizing our own king while black is unable to do anything. This is a difficult move to play, and I completely understand that someone new to chess would be quite confused because there is no immediate consequence to see. Only those experienced players can recall how the king looks good later in the endgame, and that's their way to fully understand the move f3. Basically, we want our king active via f2 and further towards the center. And we'll see later what can we do with it. We had b3 and of course a3, keeping everything locked, because that just keeps black's pieces passive. Black played h6, not that much affecting the whole position. King f2 as planned, king h7, h4, rook f8, king g3. The king is cruising into the black's camp completely safe, thanks to the fact that black's pieces are completely useless. We had rook f b8 and rook c7, bishop b5, rook 1 to c5, bishop a6, rook 5 to c6, rook e8, king f4. King is getting closer and closer to the black's camp. King g8 and then h5, cementing the f4 square, since there is not going to be any kind of g5 check anymore, and also the g6 square is potentially useful. At bishop f1, attacking the pawn, g3, bishop back to a6, and then rook f7. Every piece is brought almost to its maximum, and now it is time to use calculation and tactical skills, and not only the intuition. In terms of thinking how to put active pieces to work together, we can easily find that the rooks can be put together on the 7th rank, completely paralyzing black. Alekhine is sure that there is no way for his opponent to counter it, and he plays out the sequence. King h7, rook c to c7, rook g8. Can we do something tactically in order to eliminate the defender of the g7 pawn and basically decide the game? Let's think about it for a couple of seconds, and if you need, pause the video and take more time. Okay. The most obvious way to undermine the defender of the g7 is by attacking the rook with a knight, getting it to f6, since the g7 pawn is pinned. But black is going to move the king back to h8, and the g7 pawn is no longer going to be pinned. Or is it? Looks like there is a checkmate threat in case the pawn moves. Therefore, we can still use the f6 square, and let's play it out. Knight e7, king h8, knight f6, and then rook g to f8. That's a smart idea by black, maybe a little bit too late. Now if white takes the pawn on g7, then the f6 knight falls. Let's calculate further. That rook on f6 is blocking squares to retreat to, except of going back to f8, in which case their king gets smothered. So what do? We attack the rook using our king. You see, finally the king gets something to do. We're forcing it back to f8, and then the king gets checkmated. It's an easy tactical trick. And although black resigned before the very end, let's see how that looks on the board. And checkmate. I hope you enjoyed, and see you soon in another chess classic.